cold light cut across marble as the guard's hand stopped me at the chapel door. I'm Marshal Greer in my 50s, a former systems officer. The watch in my pocket ticked like it knew more than I did. How far would you go to reclaim a name stripped in silence? The bugle cut the air like a blade on stone. Winter light made every edge cruel. I stood at the threshold of the chapel, my breath turning to smoke that curled and vanished before it could matter. Arlington stretched white and endless behind me, graves lined like disciplined ranks. I thought I'd known cold in my life, but this cold was intimate. It searched for the cracks in bone. A soldier in white gloves stepped into my path, palm raised. His uniform creaked faintly when he moved, starch-whispering authority. "Family only, sir." His voice was even, not unkind, and that made it worse. For a moment I couldn't answer. My mouth tasted of metal like a penny pressed too long against the tongue. Behind him, a brass band swelled low and mournful. Those notes used to mean honor. Now they sounded like a verdict. My fingers found the pocket watch. The brass casing was warm against the frost on my knuckles, the only pulse I trusted. It ticked faintly beneath my thumb, steady as if time refused to take sides. I kept my hand there because if I didn't, it might ball into a fist. Quiet men don't break in public. We let the breaking happen where no one's watching. I shifted my weight and caught a flash of movement, Colonel Raymond Holt stepping out from a shadow near the chapel doors. His coat carried no snow. He hadn't walked far. His eyes locked on mine with that old polish, the shine that comes from scrubbing out doubt for decades. When his mouth curved, it wasn't a smile. It was the memory of one. "Well," he said softly, voice pitched so only I could hear over the brass. "Look who decided to crawl back." The guard held his post stiff as stone, waiting for me to move or speak. I didn't do either. Boots scraped behind me on marble whispers curling through the cold. "That's his father, the one who—" They didn't finish. They didn't have to. Words carried weight even when they stopped short. I wanted to tell them I buried my pride 3 years before I buried my boy. I wanted to ask if any of them knew what silence costs. Instead, I looked past Holt toward the chapel door where David's widow stood framed in dim light. Her shoulders drew tight under black wool head bowed like a question no one meant to answer. She didn't turn. Maybe she couldn't. Holt leaned closer, the smell of winter leather and faint cigar smoke clinging to his coat. His breath touched my ear. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "Not after what you did. What I did." The words hit harder than the wind. I kept my jaw still, let the sentence hang there until it froze like sleet between us. A sharp crack of rifle fire rolled from the far slope, 3 shots precise, echoing off stone like judgment. Taps rose after pure and brittle, a sound that could hollow a chest. The last note faded. I stayed where I was, boots grinding against marble fingers pressed to that ticking watch. Not moving was the only rebellion I had left. And as the hush returned, something colder than grief began to settle under my ribs. Not rage, not yet, but the weight of a promise. 2 mornings later, my name crawled across a headline like an old scar split open. The glow from the screen washed the chipped tabletop in blue, reflecting in the dull chrome napkin holder like a smear of frost. The diner hummed with cheap neon and the smell of fryer oil that clung to everything it touched. A waitress banged the coffee pot against its ring ceramic, clinking like a warning I pretended not to hear. Ex-officer, removed from son's funeral. The font was bold, almost smug. Below it, the article photo Holt in full dress blues, his smile tight as a noose. My fingers hesitated above the glass before scrolling. Each line felt heavier than the one before. Words sharpen when they come from strangers. They cut clean no matter how many times you think your skin has toughened. Honor isn't hereditary. Some stains don't wash out. Should have stayed gone. The comment thread crawled like ants under my skin. Some names were real, most weren't. All of them certain. I could almost hear their voices riding the static buzz above the booth, layering judgment over the hiss of the fryer and back. My coffee tasted burned bitter enough to keep me anchored. The phone buzzed once, an unknown number. Anonymous. Stop digging, or you'll join him. The words sat there like black ice, no warning before the slip. My thumb hovered over delete, then pressed save instead. Quiet doesn't mean blind. I scrolled past Holt's quote, polished for public eyes. Our thoughts remain with the family during this difficult time. My jaw clenched until it ached. A footnote at the bottom snagged my eye, a single line most readers would miss. Procurement order amendment. Approval signature on file. It linked to a redacted snippet blurred like someone had wiped the glass, but left the smear. Enough was visible to make my pulse trip. Signature Holt, Raymond A. The watch ticked against my thigh inside my jacket pocket, steady while the rest of me tilted. I stared at that clipped corner of a document, wondering how many lies you could fold into an official seal. Neon flickered above, buzzing like a gnat you couldn't kill, and the din of plates from the next booth made the air vibrate. I caught my reflection in the black glass of my phone screen, eyes ringed with the blue light of other people's certainty. My own voice sounded strange when it came out soft, almost like I was talking to someone else. They rewrote more than my record. I found Ezra where the light broke into colors no winter day had earned. The chapel smelled of old wood and candle wax, something tender clinging to the cold. A hymn floated low through tinny speakers, each note haunting like a ghost, testing perfect pitch. My boots clicked on marble before softening against the worn runner down the aisle. Ezra Brooks sat alone in the front pew, head bowed, Bible resting like an anchor beside a folder too thick to belong in a sanctuary. His coat sagged on narrow shoulders, the weight of years pressed into the seams. When he lifted his eyes, the stained glass painted his face in fragments blue, over one cheek, red, bleeding across his jaw. He didn't smile. Men like Ezra save smiles for things that matter. Marshall Greer. He said, his voice gravel in warm water. You've been haunting your own name lately. I eased onto the pew, the cushion groaning like an old wound. Word travels faster than penance, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine, maybe because I'd been talking mostly to ghosts since Arlington. Ezra's hand hovered over the folder but didn't open it. Truth can set you free, he murmured, fingers grazing the Bible's spine, or kill what's left of you. The hymn shifted keys behind us, thin and cracked, as if the speakers knew the cost of confession. Frost haloed the glass door at the back light, spilling in pale rings. I stared at the floor until I felt his gaze burn the top of my head like judgment. You still believe in truth? I asked finally. I believe in what survives it. he said. Then he slid the folder closer. A slip of paper peeked out pale as a bone shard. His fingers tapped once, slow, deliberate. I picked it up. On it, an admin override ID string curled in black ink like a snake coiled for strike. Letters, numbers, symbols, ugly little keys that open doors nobody should build. Where did this come from? I asked. He leaned back, pew creaking in protest. Someone who thought you'd need it. Someone who doesn't like how this hymn ends. My thumb found the pocket watch in my coat, tracing its glass dome smooth and flawless. I wondered how long it would stay that way. How many hands had held something whole before it shattered? This string, I said, throat dry. What does it unlock? Ezra's eyes, old and ember bright, held mine like clamps. Everything. Holt prayed you'd never see again. A draft slithered through the chapel, carrying the scent of cold stone and something sour beneath wax. I folded the slip once, twice, feeling it grow small in my palm, then slid it into my pocket like a sin you promise yourself you'll confess later. Ezra's voice followed low enough to sound like prayer. If you pull this thread, graves will open. The hymn ended. Silence filled the pews like a verdict. The file wasn't missing. It was mangled, chewed down to something that pretended to be whole. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, sharp and endless drilling into my skull until I swore I could hear the wiring whisper. The VA admin records room smelled of paper left to rot under heat, a stale cocktail of dust and ozone bleeding from overheated servers stacked like gray tombstones. I sat hunched over the laptop glow, bleaching my hands until they looked borrowed from someone already gone. The cursor blinked on a directory labeled Archived Overrides. The name felt wrong, too neat for something this dirty. One click, and the screen coughed up lines of code like ribs cracked open. The first line froze me. Timestamp 3 months after my discharge. Not possible. Not unless ghosts signed off on system changes. I scrolled fingers slick, now the cheap plastic keys clacking too loud in this mausoleum of paper and steel. And then I saw it. Metadata slithering under the surface like oil on water. Authorized by Holt Raymond A. His name floated there calm as scripture, while my pulse tripped like a wire under strain. I leaned back air too thin, and that's when my elbow clipped the edge of the table. The watch tumbled out of my pocket, kissed concrete with a sound so sharp it split the hum for half a breath. When I picked it up, my stomach sank. A spider web of cracks veined across the glass dome, splintering the perfect circle I'd trusted. My thumb traced one jagged line, each ridge a whisper. Nothing stays whole forever. The servers groaned behind me, fans whirring louder like the room had started to breathe. Then a sharp ping knifed through the noise, an alert blooming red in the corner of the screen, unauthorized access detected. Heat flared in my spine, chased by a cold that numbed my hands. I snapped the lid halfway shut, listening to the hum mutate into something meaner. That's when the phone vibrated against the desk, a tremor small but merciless. One new message. No name. Just words blacker than the screen behind them. Walk away, Greer. My teeth found copper at the edge of my tongue, bitter and warm, and I swallowed it like guilt. I closed the laptop slow quiet, as if silence could trick the wolves already circling in the dark. Some truths need a fuse. Mine blinked at me from the corner of the laptop screen. Scheduled. Send 060. The motel smelled like mildew and broken promises. Spring rain pounded against the window, slicing the neon glow into wet ribbons that painted the carpet in bruised light. The air conditioner rattled like nervous teeth exhaling cold that couldn't wash the sweat off my neck. I sat at the wobbling table hunched close, the glow carving my face into two halves. Hope on one side, ruin on the other. The folder sat open like a wound. Redemption. Zip. Inside everything, I'd bled hours for the override logs, Holt's signatures nested in metadata procurement contracts that bent like cheap steel under scrutiny. Each file named, numbered, time-stamped a ledger no one could unwrite. I dragged the last document into the chain, a scan of the maintenance memo, Holt's initials bright as a brand. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the phone gallery and snapped a shot of the watch on the table. Cracked glass, catching the neon glare like a fractured moon. I dropped it in as the final image, not evidence, just a promise that when this blew, I'd been willing to break what mattered to me. Rain hissed louder, like it knew the weight of what I was doing. I typed the subject line slow, each letter burning into the empty field. Truth won't wait. My finger hovered over the cursor, blinking like a detonator's red eye. For a second, I wondered what silence sounded like on the other side of an explosion. Then I hit schedule. The bar crawled forward, blue inching against gray. Uploading. 27%. 52%. My chest thudded in sync. The AC coughed like it might die first. I checked the corner of the screen battery at 3%. Heart sprinting, I yanked the cord, jammed it into the outlet. Nothing. Outlet dead. Bar at 78%. Rain hammered harder, muting the world, leaving only the hiss of circuitry and the groan of dying power. The screen dimmed at 93%. I whispered to no one. Come on, come on. The cursor froze, then jumped, bar flashing. Complete. The email sat cued clock icon beside it like a fuse primed to burn. 060 wasn't far, but far enough for doubt to breed if I let it. I closed the lid, breath fogging in the glow of the neon sign bleeding through the curtain. My reflection ghosted back at me, jaw-tight eyes, hollow lips, shaping the words like scripture truth won't wait. I stepped into the hearing room under lights too white to forgive. They carved the walls into sterile slabs, turning faces into masks. My boots left dark blooms on the pale tile spring rain, dripping off the hem of my coat, trailing a story no one here wanted to read. Camera lenses lined the far wall, perched like carrion birds waiting for the first twitch of death. A red dot pulsed on the main one, steady as a heartbeat I could no longer trust. The room smelled of wet wool and cold ink, a courtroom without robes, just uniforms stiff with rank and pride. A placard gleamed on the table. Proceedings, live-streamed, public access enabled. The words felt less like notice, more like a threat. Above the panel, a banner scrolled across a mounted screen. Hearing commences. Board Oversight Review. A chat window fluttered alive in the corner, comments stinging faster than raindrops on glass. Isn't this the funeral guy traders back for pity points? Someone typed a skull emoji. It glowed white against black like a tooth in the dark. I kept my wrists low cuffs biting the skin where nerves drummed a steady war. Across the table, Holt sat with his hands folded like prayer lips stretched into a courtroom smile that didn't reach his eyes. His dress blues were crisp enough to slice the silver bars, winking every time he moved. The clerk's keys clattered brittle as bones. Beside her, a fountain pen clicked in a restless staccato. The hum of the projector vibrated under the floor, a faint growl no one acknowledged. I focused on that sound. It was the only thing in this room that didn't lie. The chair cleared her throat, voice polished sharp as lacquer. This hearing will determine the validity of the evidence provided by Mr. Marshall Greer regarding alleged misconduct in override protocols post-discharge. Holt's head turned slightly profile clean as a medal struck from brass. When he spoke, it was a sermon disguised as testimony. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice rich, rehearsed. "We are here because readiness was compromised, because one man's ambition placed lives and assets in jeopardy. We cannot allow personal vendettas to bleed into operational integrity." His gaze slid across the table like oil. "Found me, held me, this man," he said, pausing just enough for the camera to drink it in, betrayed his oath. "And now he seeks to rewrite failure as fiction." The comment thread flared on-screen lies catch up old man, strip his benefits. A string of fire emojis burned down the side panel. I felt my jaw clench until it creaked. Every nerve screamed to hurl the truth across the table, let the world choke on Holt's spotless veneer. But tantrums don't win wars. Timing does. So I sat still, hands laced, breathing in the reek of damp coats and bureaucratic rot waiting for my opening. The chair adjusted her glasses, voice a scalpel. "Now, Colonel Holt, your statement is entered into record. We will now proceed to review submitted documentation." My pulse hitched. This was the hand I'd stacked cards for files queued on encrypted drives, timer ticking toward dawn. But Holt moved first, sliding a folder toward the clerk, its tab neat as a lie dressed for Sunday. "Panel will note," he said smoothly, "that the override logs flagged by Mr. Greer were extracted without authorization, compromising system security. A breach of this magnitude warrants permanent clearance denial." His words landed like nails, each syllable hammered by the keyboard's clack as the clerk transcribed my funeral into official language. The chair barely glanced at me. "Mr. Greer, do you contest this?" "I contest gravity if you tell me it bends for men like him," I said quietly. My voice didn't carry far, but Holt heard. I saw the flicker in his eyes, fast as static behind glass. She frowned, noted. Her tone made it sound like dust on a ledger. The screen blinked. Board deliberation, pending. Then, like a gavel without wood, her verdict struck: evidence insufficient. Clearance denial stands. Air thickened. Comments bloomed like weeds. "Pack it up, Greer. Guess lies don't fly today." A laughing gif looped soundless but loud enough to scrape my skull. Holt leaned forward close enough for me to smell the starch in his collar. His whisper was venom sweetened for the kill. "This is where your fight dies." Something inside me stayed still, quieter than prayer, but sharper than hate. My hand curled under the table, fingers wrapping the cracked watch, feeling its fractured glass bite against my palm. Beneath the cuff, it ticked a steady, secret countdown no one else could hear. I slid the drive across the mahogany table like placing a heart on cold altar stone. It gleamed under the fractured light, slicing in through rain-streaked glass gold, bleeding across the floor, polished so bright it could have doubled as a mirror for sins. Holt's eyes tracked the movement. his jaw-tight lips pressed into a line no uniform could iron flat. The room had shifted since morning, less sterile, more electric. Cameras lined the walls like patient predators, lenses winking red. The air smelled of polish and sweat ozone from overworked lights lingering like static in a storm. Ezra stood near the back posture, steady hands folded over a Bible whose spine looked older than every lie in this room. "Proceed," the chair said, her voice cracking the hush like a baton on metal. I opened the laptop. Screens along the wall flared awake in unison, their glow washing faces into shades of guilt and awe. One click, and the evidence spilled across them like blood blooming through gauze override logs stacked in neat rows, every entry tagged with Holt's credentials, timestamps screaming louder than my voice ever could. Screenshots of procurement anomalies contract pages annotated in digital red, his initials floating like oil slicks on water black and undeniable. Gasps hissed through the gallery. The first camera shutter snapped, then another, then a volley clicks stuttering like gunfire as reporters leaned in. A mic boomed, then choked back to silence when the chair lifted a hand. The livestream ticker at the bottom of the screens pulsed, breaking new evidence surfaces in Greer case. Holt moved barely a twitch in his right hand, a tremor he couldn't brief away. His breath fogged the glass of the water tumbler in front of him, fingers gripping its edge so hard I thought it might shatter. "This board," the chair said, each word, a gavel strike, acknowledges submission of authenticated logs, override sequences, and signed authorizations that confirm prior misrepresentation of record. Her gaze cut to Holt, then back to me. By authority vested in this panel, the clearance denial is reversed. Effective, immediately technical certification and security status are fully restored to Mr. Marshall Greer. The words didn't hit like a drum roll. They landed quiet, cold final like steel dropped on marble. For a second, the hum of cameras drowned everything else. Then a sound swelled chairs, scraping voices rippling like a tide. "Sir, how long were these files suppressed?" "Colonel Holt, will you resign?" But I didn't turn toward them. I looked at Ezra. He stepped forward through the storm of flashes, calm as scripture. His coat smelled faintly of candle wax and old rain. In his hand, something glinted a circle of time reborn. The watch. Its face was whole again, glass smooth as still water, gears humming beneath like a second heart. "Time never failed you," Ezra said softly, pressing it into my palm. People did. For a breath, the weight of it was colder than steel, then warmer than blood, heat seeping slow into my skin. My fingers closed around it, and with that click, something inside me loosened after years wound tight. Behind us, the chair's voice cut again. "Colonel Raymond Holt is hereby relieved of advisory duties pending further inquiry." The live stream banner flared in red bold letters, marching across the feed. Breaking whistle. Clear's name Holt removed from post. Shutters clattered like hail. Holt sat hollow-eyed, medals still pinned, but meaning gutted the courtroom's smile long dead. I rose. Reporters surged forward, neon mic flags flashing in the light. One voice broke through the static, sharp as a nail. "Mr. Greer, will you return to service?" I let the question hang, their lenses lunging for the answer. My fingers curled around the watch, ticking steady against my pulse. And then I smiled. Not for them, not for redemption, but for the first breath that felt like mine. Freedom didn't roar. It whispered through rain sliding off the diner awning in slow silver threads. The neon sign out front blinked like tired lungs, pink light gasping against the summer dusk. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the kind that still smelled faintly of smoke from decades ago, a chipped sugar jar sweating on the table between me and Ezra. He cradled a cup of black coffee like it owed him nothing, steam coiling against the war lines in his face. Behind him, a jukebox hummed something soft and out of tune, drowned under the hiss of fry oil from the kitchen. The air smelled of burnt toast and rain-soaked asphalt, a perfume only old diners can bottle. "You didn't just stir the pot," Ezra said finally, voice like gravel rolled in warm water. "You flipped the whole damn table." He set his cup down, the clink louder than the sentence. I stared at the papers he'd slid across to me. Government issue folder, olive green corners sharp as judgment. The reinstatement order sat on top, stamped and signed thick as scripture. Every letter on the page looked heavy enough to drag me back under. They moved fast, he added. Holt signed a plea deal. Advisory privileges gone. He'll fade into some gated community and rot in silence. No cell, no stripes. Just gone. His tone didn't carry triumph, just a flat, worn truth. Justice on paper always feels lighter than the weight you hauled to get it there. I nudged the folder back across the table with 2 fingers. "I'm done fighting ghosts in uniforms," I said, my voice low, steady, almost gentle. Ezra didn't flinch, just studied me with those eyes deep as foxholes filled with rain. Then what he asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. My thumb brushed the edge of the watch resting near the coffee ring on the table. Its glass gleamed whole again, no cracks, just the clean face of time ticking softer now, like something finally healed. I closed my fingers around it and let the sound settle in my bones. Outside, a truck hissed past on slick pavement taillights, smearing red across the window. Inside, a waitress dropped silverware metal on tile sharp as an unplanned confession. I grabbed a napkin, its paper thin as breath, and wrote with the stub of a pencil scavenged from the check tray, "Cleared sun." But I'm building forward, not back. The words bled faint gray on cheap white pulp. I folded the napkin, slid it into my wallet like a truce with the past. Ezra watched me, hands cupped around his mug, steam ghosting upward like incense. "So," he said, a smile cutting faint through the fog of old battles. "What will you build now?" Rain answered first, drumming steady against the glass, louder than my silence. The neon blinked again, on-off on casting the booth in fever pink like a heartbeat refusing to quit. I looked down at the watch ticking in my palm like a question that had finally stopped running. 6 months later, the world smelled like oil and sun-warmed steel instead of courtrooms and rain. I stood in a workshop that buzzed louder than any war room I'd ever known, not with orders but with second chances, humming in socket wrenches and low laughter. Light spilled through high windows in dusty shafts, painting the benches in stripes of gold and grime. The late summer heat pressed against the back of my neck, mixing with the tang of grease, the faint sweetness of sawdust from a side project where someone was building a bench for the lobby. "Right hand steady," I said, guiding a young vet's grip on a torque wrench. His boots were scuffed, his shirt blotched with sweat and pride. "Listen for the click, not the strain. Torque's not about force, it's about trust." He nodded, face half-shadowed under a ball cap frayed at the brim. Behind us, a drill whirred to life, whining high like an anxious bird before settling into a steady hum. Someone laughed, one of the women rebuilding a carburetor on the far table, and the sound threaded itself into the rhythm of tools like a new kind of music. I caught Ezra leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, smile curved like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence only he understood. His presence was light now, not the weight it had been in those chapel pews. Just a steady figure watching roots take hold in steel and skin. On the far wall, a hand-painted sign swayed gently in the breeze, sneaking through the open dock door. Second Chance Tools. The letters weren't straight. Paint dripped at the corners. Perfect. I reached into my pocket and felt the circle of time that had walked through fire with me. The watch. Its glass caught a sliver of sunlight flashing gold across my palm. I turned to the youngest in the room, a kid barely out of the uniform's shadow eyes, hungry for purpose. "Here," I said, placing it in his hand. The metal was cool at first, then warmed quick against his skin like it had chosen him. "Time's yours now. Make it count." His throat bobbed. No words, just a nod so sharp it almost cut the air. The kind of nod you make when something more than metal touches bone. Behind us, a news camera slid silent along its track lens, sweeping the space like an eye trying to memorize hope. But no ticker, no headline could script this grease-streaked fingers learning balance sweat drying into salt on callers' voices sharing small jokes over bolts and bearings. This was what vindication looked like when it outgrew vengeance, quiet, useful, alive. I stepped back, wiped my palms on a rag stained with 10 other stories, and glanced at my empty wrist. Funny thing, I could still hear it ticking. Not in gears now, but in the bones of this place, in the slow, steady beat of something that had stopped breaking. Outside, the wind lifted, and the sign creaked once like a door opening, not to a hearing room, not to a grave, but to a space where silence had finally learned how to speak. The smell of polished wood mixed with machine oil, as I wiped the watch's glass, the seam smooth as an overdue apology. Time doesn't give back what it takes, but it teaches you where to place what's left. A clipped newsletter tacked to the board read, "Second Chance Tools now enrolling." Around me, young vets laughed over steel benches, while the repaired watch ticked softly in my palm, no longer mine, but still running. What will you do with the time life hands you next?